Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Ashley Herrera from the University of La Verne. Today for our project-based learning sort of flip classroom podcast type of project is going to be covering chapters 3, 4, and 5 of our textbook, which is Reinventing Project-Based Learning, Your Field Guide to Real-World Projects in the Digital Age by Susie Boss and Jane Cross, I think is how you say her last name. And again, this will be covering chapters 3, 4, and 5, and is basically going to kind of be your guide in introducing everything that you need to know and that is important to know when doing project-based learning. So the first chapter we covered is chapter 3, Imagining the Possibilities. Chapter 3 is basically the introduction into the next 3 chapters of introducing us into project-based learning. This chapter focuses on establishing the conceptual framework of a project. It really puts into perspective or kind of breaks down the planning processes of project-based learning and those types of lesson plans that you create. It explains what big ideas are and what's important in project-based learning. And if you hear me throughout the slide saying PBL, that's just an abbreviation for project-based learning, as I'm sure most of you already know. The chapter goes into explaining how important learning is beyond the textbook. For me, this is also very important. I sometimes have trouble following things on the textbook, and I kind of feel or catch myself veering off into my own little techniques and ways of teaching things. So project-based learning for a educator like me is really a lot easier, and I think is just a more engaging way of teaching and interacting with my students and teaching them beyond the textbook. And it's up to us as teachers and educators to create the synthesis for our students to understand, and sometimes that is making understanding a little bit easier when it's not all textbook-based learning. In education in general, projects are an important part of learning, and they're designed as complete learning experiences by us, the teachers. It's our job to make sure that our students are getting every learning experience that they possibly can when doing project-based learning. It is important to identify the big ideas, the core concepts and processes, and it is at the heart of the subject of your project-based learning styles that we will teach, which is the first step of your project planning. So in project-based learning, the teacher relies on more than just a textbook, but doesn't make the book the main foundation of the course. Instead, the textbook might be more of a reference instead of basing everything off that. Published curriculum and content standards dive straightway into a sequence of learning objectives. Synthesis, again, for understanding is important. Projects are very, very highly contextual. In order for a teacher to create a good project for their students, it is important to make sure that the projects connect directly to the students' framework, references, interests, and also their experiences. So for me, project-based learning just keeps your students more engaged, gets them more excited to learn, a little bit more willing to learn and pay attention, especially if you're referring back to their interests and experiences and basing some more of their assignments or projects off of that. I think that it definitely is a good idea to just help connect with your students, on a different level. This goes more into the big idea. All my references are from our textbook. This is on page 63. When engaging in PBL, teachers need to think about the big ideas of the curriculum surrounding the project. Every grade level and subject area focuses on big ideas, and so do disciplines in the world outside of school. So it's kind of bringing more of the outside world into the classroom. It's important to think about the real world context in order to help reveal the interdisciplinary nature of a project. And this is where I think kind of grabs students' attention a little bit more. Project-based learning is not like traditional learning, and it can get messy and it can overlap things, but it is the overlapping space that allows for a great project to be created. The more students connect with the subject or project, the more the project will grow, and the more your student will learn and actually enjoy learning. As teachers and educators, we can take this opportunity to collaborate with our fellow educators and colleagues and engage experts. Brainstorming is very important, but also brainstorming with your colleagues is very important. It's always good to get some type of feedback and to just also see, what other type of learning styles and PBL styles that other teachers have as well. A well-designed project causes students to stretch their intellectual muscles in ways that traditional learning activities may not. Again, this is why I really do like the PBLs. And for me, even still as a student and learner, I definitely like PBLs more in my classes as well. So as the project commences, we need to talk about with our students the factors that influence learning. And project-based learning is important because helping students develop information and media literacy calls on new instructional tasks for the teacher and also for the student. So that sort of wraps up Chapter 3 here for us. Next, we're going to be moving on to Chapter 4, which is Strategies for Discovery. This goes more into depth of reviewing the projects, learning through observations, and also still relying more or bringing more real life outside the classroom into your project-based learning. In Chapter 4, we go more in depth about reviewing projects and how to be selective when it comes to the quality of your project-based learning plan. Even if you ultimately decide to design your own project plan, it helps to review other plans first for extra reference. Again, as it said in Chapter 3, brainstorming with your colleagues is also very important when it comes to your lesson plans for your PBLs. Aspects of critical thinking is another very important area where it will help create a better outcome for your PBL. So compare and contrast, predict, understanding the relationships, the cause and effect. Kind of just make everything as relatable as a whole as you can. Look at the change over time, identify patterns or trends, and this is something that you are going to be doing with your students throughout your PBLs. Good projects are everywhere. The best projects have the following qualities. This was again from our textbooks, loosely designed, with different learning paths, are generative, causing students to construct meaning. Basically, you want your student to get the most enriched learning experience from your PBLs as they possibly can. And again, to really engage your students, it is important that you set up a situation in which they want to ask questions. Make them want to learn more. Make them want to know something that they don't yet know, and have them believe and make it important to them. If you are able to do that with your students, then you are going to be setting up your pathway for very good PBLs. So lastly, we are going to be looking into Chapter 5, which is making assessment meaningful. Project-based learning is personalized learning. Again, that is something that has been introduced to us in Chapter 3. Project-based learning is a lot more personalized, and that's why we want to engage in our students' interests and preferences and things of that sort. That way we can actually, for once, get our students excited about learning. That way, if we're pulling more of their outside world into the classroom, again, it's going to make them more willing to learn. So in Chapter 5, we go into the assessment making process, and this really is the beginning of your overall project-based learning lesson plan. It's important that all your project-based learning lessons are truly open-minded, because when they are, each student approaches the learning experience in a unique way of their own. It is also important to assess students' progress and achievement, as this will set the perimeters for your students' learning activity through your project design. During projects, it is important to remember that during projects, students go through a progression of activities. They should be questioning, investigating, making sense of what they discovered. We want them to be asking more questions and doing more research. And at the end of your PBL, you want your students to be emerging with a new understanding, a full understanding of the meaning of what it is that they just learned. The way we are going to get powerful teaching and learning is not through national tests. Again, reaching more back into PBLs, more personal-based learning. This is going to include objectives, evidence, activities, and things like that. Teachers and educators, remember your approach to assessment does require deliberate planning. So you need to make sure that your PBLs need to be well thought out, well planned, well organized for the best possible outcome of your students. Sorry, I went to the last slide before I was ready. We're going to get powerful teaching and learning through assessments that are developed by local communities. Local communities means your students, the teachers, other members of the school. This is where we're going to get the most powerful teaching and most powerful learning for our students and make their minds grow as much as we possibly can. Again, local communities, teachers, parents, community members, this is a way that students are working more towards a challenging standard, and when there's more people involved, they have a better chance of being successful with that. Engaged and aware teachers assesses nonstop from the moment they introduce the project all the way until they move on to the next one. So if we want our students to stay engaged throughout the whole project, we need to make sure that we are engaged and aware of our students throughout our PBLs from start to finish until we move on to the next one. So I hope that this kind of gave you a general understanding of what project-based learning is. Again, chapters 3, 4, and 5 of the textbook is where I got all of my reference from. If you wanted to look more into detail on any points from the slide, I put the page numbers next to each point that I had highlighted here. So yeah, that's project-based learning. I personally enjoy it. I love doing it as an educator and as a student. I think it's a great way for teachers and students to just engage in a very powerful growth mindset of learning. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.